That is actually how I first discovered gender ideology, because I was studying sex education because so many of my patients had sexually transmitted diseases. I wanted to see, what are they learning? What are young people learning about sexuality and staying healthy? And so I started to explore online the material that was created. This is all the way back in 2007, 2008. I started to look at the curricula.
Hello, my name is Anne McElhinney.
And I'm Phelim McAleer.
And welcome to the Anne and Phelim Scoop.
Yes, so we have a lot of new viewers.
Yes.
Yes, people are coming. We have a lot of new subscribers. So for people who don't know who we are, people have come through the Trans on Trial play, through the Mark Stein podcast. For our new viewers and listeners, we are investigative journalists. We cover a story the mainstream media don't want you to cover, or they hide. We expose the lies fueling the Me Too movement. We talk about abortion. We talk about trans madness. We talk about justice. We talk about Trump. So come here for the stories you won't see anywhere else. Covered in a way that you won't see covered anywhere else at all. So we cover a lot of topics. I want to say we are a 501c3, a registered charity. We are dependent on your donations. Mm-hmm. We are doing the stories that people don't cover. People want to shut us down. We need your help to keep going, to keep telling the truth. It's compelling. So please give what you can. Go to unreportedstorysociety.com. That's unreportedstorysociety.com.
And we'll have a link in the show notes where you can donate. And thank you so much.
We depend on people like you. And I know many people out there give us much support. And we thank you. And let's keep it going. And let's keep causing trouble. What's on the show today, Anne McElhinney?
Well, we've big news that our trans play has been watched by almost 70,000 people so far. As we're talking right now. This is a couple of days before this.
Yes. And we'll talk about more. But that's the Trans on Trial, which is a verbatim play about the madness that is currently afoot the earth.
The contagion, the mad contagion. And because of that, we actually have invited back on to the podcast this week. Our guest is Miriam Grossman, Dr. Miriam Grossman, child psychiatrist, expert on the whole trans madness. And it's a brilliant interview. Do not miss that.
Yes. And we have a new feature on the script. And we have a little musical interlude to introduce. Let's hear it. Yes, the new feature is called Burying the Lead.
I love this. This.
It's what the media do when they spend resources investigating a story and suddenly discover, a story
that they don't want to report on.
Yes, the conclusions go against the liberal narrative. So
they have a clever trick.
They bury the true story in paragraph
as
37. As
low as they can.
Paragraph 37 or towards the end. So we'll give you
We're going to highlight that.
Yeah. And thank you for all the comments we're getting on Trans on Trial, which is on YouTube, transontrial.com. We're going to read you some of the wonderful comments many of our viewers have left. It's been one of our most successful projects. The response has been amazing, so we'll talk about that.
And it's
later.
Very, very important. Obviously, it's an incredibly important play.
Speaking of that, we have launched our Trans on Trial play, which is the recreation of the Mermaids versus LGB Alliance Charity Commission case, which we filmed a year or two ago, let's say, quite a while ago. It's a verbatim play, and for those who don't know what verbatim plays are, we take actual transcripts from a courtroom drama, a grand jury, like we did the Ferguson play where we used the actual transcripts of the grand jury. And the truth there was so explosive. 9 of the actors walked out during rehearsals because they can't handle the truth, to quote another actor.
Yes.
It's a very, very powerful dramatic, because in court you can't rely on political slogans. You have to tell the truth. You're under oath. And people are forced to tell the truth, and the truth is compelling.
And people are really enjoying the play. People are really enjoying watching it, and it's interesting. And it comes up actually in the interview that I have with Miriam Grossman. One of the problems with the whole trans contagion and trans madness is that it's so disturbing, so horrific, so Frankenstein that so many people don't want to talk about it. And actually, in some ways, I think this is one of the very special things about Trans on Trial is it's actually very accessible, and it's quite funny. And it shouldn't be funny, but it is funny because it's so ludicrous. Because
of the contortions that people go to try and justify. I mean, actually, eugenics makes more sense than trans. In the sense that what people knew then about DNA and all that,
Well, in the interview coming up now, actually, I brought up eugenics with Miriam Grossman in the interview I did earlier with her, and she actually says, because I was saying it's kind of worse than eugenics, and she said, well, it is also eugenics because it's creating a generation of people who are sterile.
Yes,
because of these horrific surgeries they're doing on people. So we're going to actually go over to that interview that I did just a little bit earlier.
I just say transontrial.com is where you can find the play. Transontrial.com. Let's go over to that interview that you did with Miriam Grossman earlier, just before we came on air. Let's go over to that interview now.
So this week's guest is child psychiatrist Miriam Grossman, whose brilliant and at times terrifying 2023 book, Lost in Trans Nation, describes the nightmare landscape of the trans madness and how to navigate it. Miriam, very, very welcome back to the show.
It's great to be back with you, Anne. Really, really good.
Thank you so much. So yesterday, basically, I just wanted to tell you, you kind of ruined my day yesterday because I started rereading Lost in Trans Nation, and it's so haunting, the story of the origins of this, which I think, is it fair to say that John Money is at the very centre of the starting of this madness?
Well, that's how I see it, yes.
Tell us, remind us who he was and what he did, and this frightening story, and everyone will understand why I had to get out of the house and go for a walk on the beach to recover from reading it.
I'm glad you had the beach to walk on. Okay, I'll significantly edit it because we would be here for an hour just talking about what he did. John Money was an Australian psychologist who came and got his PhD at Harvard. He had a special interest in what was then called hermaphrodites, which are children who are born with genitalia that are not clearly male or female. He became very interested in how best to help these families and these kids, and he opened up a clinic at Johns Hopkins University. Now, we're going all the way back to the 50s and 60s, and essentially what happened is that John Money came up with a theory called his gender theory, and he proposed that we are all born gender neutral, meaning with the potential of successfully living and identifying as either male or female, because he suggested male or female were social constructs. In other words, just simply ideas and persona that were thrust on us by society and not based at all in biology. So he came up with this theory. He had no way, of course, to prove it until a family. The big until. A family appeared in his office. They were a young blue-collar family from Canada who had given birth to two boys about a year and a half earlier. And at the circumcision of one of these boys, there was an accident and his penis was burnt off. So they had one normal boy and one boy whose penis had been burnt off. And they were at a loss, of course, and desperate about what to do. They heard John Money on television proposing his theory and saying that a boy could be raised as a girl successfully, so long as it was done early enough. John Money was a very strong personality. He came across as an authority. When he spoke, people listened. And, these blue collar, high school educated parents were taken in by him and trusted him completely. They took their boys down to Baltimore to see him at his clinic. He advised them to immediately castrate, so remove the testicles of the boy whose name was Brian, and to raise him as a girl, to change his name, to put him in dresses, to give him dolls. This was in the 60s, and to never tell him that he was born a boy, that he was a boy. They did that. They tried to follow it to the T, and they would go down to see Dr. Money every year for a checkup. Dr. Money began to report this experiment as a great success when the twins were about 6 years old. And he got tremendous coverage both in professional literature and in just regular media, Time magazine, the New York Times, and so on and so forth. Because this was just an incredible thing, of course, to report that a boy with XY chromosomes, completely normal, was being successfully raised as a girl. Unfortunately, that was not the case. It was not a success. In fact, he was very unhappy. He never accepted his role as a girl. He used to rip off his dresses. He preferred rough and tumble play. He was actually more stereotypically male than his brother, than his identical brother. I'm leaving out a lot of stuff here, but basically when he reached, and he had been renamed Brenda. So when Brenda reached puberty, Dr. Money instructed the parents to have her put on estrogen so that she would begin to grow breasts. And he began to try and Dr. Money tried to convince Brian to have genital surgery that would construct a vagina. This made Brenda so upset. And P.S., in addition, he and his brother were being sexually abused during those yearly visits with Dr. Money. Dr. Money really was a monster, an immoral, emotionally disturbed individual, a psychopath. And he left Dr. Money's office, and the twins told their parents they never wanted to go back there again. Brian's psychiatrist in Canada noted that Brenda was extremely upset because she was realizing that she was romantically attracted to girls, and she became suicidal. And the very wise psychiatrist told Brenda's parents that they must sit down and tell both the twins the truth. It was time to do that. And so, against Dr. Money's advice, they did that. And Brenda, later on, when interviewed by Oprah Winfrey, reported that moment, what he felt was tremendous relief.
Yeah.
Tremendous relief that he was...
Because everything made sense now. Yeah, his whole life made sense suddenly for the first time, right?
He immediately went back to living as a boy. He picked the name David because he felt like he was the biblical David fighting Goliath. He, of course, went off the estrogen. He had a number of surgeries on his genitals. He got older. He married a woman and adopted her children. And it sounded like it was going to end well, but it unfortunately did not. Both these boys were very damaged by Dr. Money and by the whole experience. They ended up both committing suicide.
Yeah.
So the reason why of course, this story is very, very important. But you see, the reason why it's important to gender ideology is because this was the experiment that was supposed to prove that gender was completely separate from biology.
Yeah. Yeah, and he still gets quoted. I mean the story. Now people have heard it, and they'll probably understand why I needed to get out of the house. Like, it was just it's so disturbing. But here's my question to you. Has he been roundly recognised as the psycho that he was? Has the medical establishments come out and withdrawn, by the way, the awards he received?
No, absolutely not.
Why not?
Let that question echo in the air. Why not?
Thank you.
He is held up as a pioneer, as a contributor to our understanding of sexuality and gender. This is the world that we live in. But as we do regain a sense of sanity in the world regarding the gender issue, perhaps it will happen. Perhaps, who knows? When you see what's happened in just the past year, in the past 6 months, regarding gender medicine and it being exposed as a very dangerous scam without bona fide evidence behind it, harming children, harming families, and a lot of countries doing a 180 in terms of gender care. I'm hopeful. I think it could happen. Maybe I'm too optimistic.
I think, and it's interesting because that's an interesting point, is some countries. So I think, you correct me if I'm wrong, but the UK seem to be the leader almost in this around the world, in discount, in bringing sanity back. And my question to you is, first of all, do you agree with that? But most importantly, maybe for our audience, What's happening here in the US? You say you're seeing good signs of sanity. Obviously, some good things have happened with the Trump administration making some very, very good executive orders and stating some, biological fact as fact for the first time. Tell me where you see the hope.
Okay, well, you're right. The UK, and the decisions that they've made and the CAS review, obviously, that came out of the UK has been huge. There are other countries as well that people maybe didn't hear about so much because it was suppressed in the media. But Sweden and Norway also came out a few years ago and reversed their pro-affirming care, so-called affirming care interventions. And they looked at the data and they decided that the data is very poor. The evidence is very poor. And we can't go about harming these kids who are in the process of just developing. Their bodies are not developed. Their brains are certainly not developed. And we know that gender identity is fluid. Gender identity is not permanent. And so the idea of going ahead and giving these kids puberty blockers, followed by cross-sex hormones, followed in some cases by surgery, is just preposterous and unethical. To do that when a few years later they may wake up and say, just a minute, wait, what have I done? Yeah, what have I done?
When in your book, you wrote about the fact that, like, when you started out in your psychiatric career, you expected to maybe come across maybe one of these people, with the gender dysphoria. You expected to have very, very limited contact with people like this because it was so rare. That's not what happened. Can you just describe the explosion in the numbers, and are you seeing some tapering off? Because that sounds like maybe you're seeing some tapering off, which would be wonderful news.
I can't say that we've seen tapering off yet. That I can't say. But I do want your audience to understand that 20 years ago, there were only 3 clinics that would help families who had a child or an adolescent with gender distress. 3 clinics, and in the entire world. I mean, now we have 3, probably, more than 3 just in Manhattan.
Oh my God. Yeah. I think you said something like there was 100 in America, but it's probably more than that, right?
Well, I mean, it depends how you count them, because there's private doctors that are also, they're not a clinic, but yeah, I mean, for sure, there's hundreds and hundreds of places. Many of the Planned Parenthoods all over the country are supplying hormones. Thank you.
Yeah.
So there was an explosion of cases starting maybe in the early 2010 and forward. And, we're still studying why that happened. It did coincide, incidentally, with the explosion of social media and the explosion of kids having their own phones with social media and Instagram and YouTube and, all the other places where these kids who were on testosterone and estrogen would go on and just celebrate their euphoria about growing facial hair and growing, breasts. And it impacted a great number of young people.
You mentioned Planned Parenthood, and it kind of brings me to my next question, which was, your other book that you wrote, which was amazing, which was You're Teaching My Child What? I've added a little drama to that, but I think that's exactly how you wanted to be, the title to be expressed. This is extraordinarily important, and I really want to dig into this a little bit. So in schools across the United States, and by the way, across the world, there are these curricula that are coming not from, and you can correct me again, not from internally among teachers getting together, but from groups like Planned Parenthood are coming up with these very elaborate curricula that are then imposed on schools, teaching children complete madness, complete lies. Can you describe, tell me who's writing these? How does this even happen? Tell me how bad that situation is and how prevalent is it?
That is actually how I first discovered gender ideology, because I was studying sex education, because so many of my patients had sexually transmitted diseases. I wanted to see, what are they learning? What are young people learning about sexuality and staying healthy? And so I started to explore online, the material that was created, this is all the way back in 2007, 2008, I started to look at the curricula that are created by organizations such as Planned Parenthood. There's Advocates for Youth, SIECUS, which is the Sexuality Information and Education Council of the United States. So these are all nonprofits that get federal funding, and they are radical activists who simply want to inject their ideology, their radical ideology about sexuality and about gender, and indoctrinate young kids. So I recognized at that time how dangerous it was for a child, to be taught that there's many genders and
yeah, you can be born in the wrong body, yeah.
That, gender is separate from your body, and it can, when there's a conflict or an incongruence between how you feel and what your body says, then it's your feeling that overrides your body, and that anyone that doesn't support you doesn't love you. So you see, this is so destructive. It destroys it. It can destroy a child. It can destroy the nuclear family, because then the child has been told that, if your parents don't support you and use your new name and your new pronouns and take you to a gender clinic for hormones, they don't love you.
Well, I think the word you used to describe it in Lost in Transnation, which I can't recommend the book more, by the way, and I'll put it into the show notes for anybody who hasn't already read it. You really need to read it. But I really appreciate you use the word evil, because honestly, there's no point in calling it anything else. I mean, it as I said, I mean, literally yesterday, I mean, it's so disturbing. And actually, this is an interesting point as well, because I spoke to I won't say who it is, but anyway, quite a famous writer recently who feels she should write about it, but says she has avoided it because it's so dark. And I spoke to quite a famous playwright who said basically the same thing. And this is one of the problems with the trans issue, is it's so disturbing, so deeply disturbing, so evil, that we kind of hide, we kind of run away.
Yes. I love what you just said, because decent people cannot absorb that there is such evil in the world.
Yeah.
And they want they want to either run away from it or justify it by saying, well, it's got to be saving lives.
Oh God, yeah. Suicide.
It's the only reason doctors would be doing this and sex ed would be teaching it is in order to save lives. But that is simply not true.
It's extraordinary. It's extraordinary how much of a hold it's taken. And I mean, I would say there's no one listening to us, to this podcast, who hasn't had a personal connection with this. I've had a personal connection with it myself, with a dear, dear child that is, but who's now doing very well, by the way, thanks be to God. I had ranks of people praying. And actually, this brings me to the next thing that I really want. And I think all our listeners are going to really want to hear this from you. Can you give us advice? So let me put it this way. Let's say 3 things, or whatever, if you can think of a list of maybe 3 things that a parent can do who is faced with this nightmare. What can a parent do? And then we add that, like, caring relatives, caring adults involved in a child's life. What can a person do? What's the best advice?
I would say, first of all, to know that you're not alone and to get support. There is so much support that's out there from other parents, organizations. You can go to my website, miriamgrossmanmd.com. I have a list of all kind of places where you can find support. And when I say support to stay grounded in reality, but to still hold on to your relationship with your child. And of course, that's the big challenge.
Yeah.
Because the child is not in reality, and the child is being influenced by so many people and organizations to dismiss and reject reality, and you are going to hold on to reality. So you want to do everything you can to nurture the relationship, to make it stronger. And you can do that by, depending on the child, I mean, parents know their children best.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're able to find ways to connect with your child outside of the gender issue, so doing things that you both enjoy, finding subjects that you can discuss that might bring you closer, letting the child know that you can see how important this is to them and you're with them. It doesn't mean that you're going to agree on everything, but people who love each other often disagree about big things.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't mean that the relationship is over. Far from it. Families can disagree. Husbands and wives can disagree. You can have a Republican dad and a Democrat mom, and they're, not seeing eye to eye, and that can get very big. And there's any number of things like that in which people can disagree. You want to find out who is influencing your child.
Mm-hmm.
Who are they talking to? You want to get control, and I tell in my book how to do this, of their internet use, depending on the age. The internet is full of people groomers, who are looking for your child. They're looking for your confused, vulnerable child, trying to befriend them and exploit them. You must figure out who your child, teachers, who's at school, who are their friends parents. You can't take anything for granted, and you have to be very vigilant. And I'm going to add, you have to take care of yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think parents are at the end of their, like, it's such a nightmare to be living through. On the school front, I can't even imagine this. Can a parent, what can a parent do to get a teacher to shut up? To put it mildly, and to stop grooming their children. Is there anything a parent can do on that?
Parents, I strongly suggest that at the beginning of the school year, no matter how old your child is, you submit a letter to the school, and it's on my website. You can find it there. And you give it to the principal, and that letter is going to say, I do not give my permission for my child to be taught gender ideology. My child's, for anyone to use different pronouns or a different name, for my child to use the opposite sex, bathroom, for my child to, this is a big one, for my child to be taken into a meeting with a guidance counselor or social worker without my prior knowledge and permission.
Unbelievable. But in some states, am I correct about this, that in some states they're making it law that they can do that the school can actually go ahead and communicate privately with your child and do these kind of things?
Of course, yes. There are quite a few states, and parents are bringing lawsuits against schools and school districts for having secretly socially transitioned their child. So this is all happening now. If possible, you want to homeschool, if that's at all possible,
yeah,
so that
you
can have control over what your kid is exposed to. But many parents cannot do that. So you want to go in the school, you want to walk up and down the halls, see what sorts of things are in the hallway, see what sort of, meet the teachers, see, you can ask these questions. And it's always better, if you have a specific concern, to go into the principal's office as a group. Don't go in as an individual, because the school is going to say, you're the only parent that has...
you're a crackpot. Yeah. So that's a very, very good idea. That's a really practical one. I love that. Go into the school as a group. Excellent.
And my book has an entire chapter about what schools are doing. Parents need to get educated. And that's why I wrote the book, is because I was seeing so much in my private practice that I wanted parents to not be taken unawares. And one day their child comes in at the dinner table and says, I'm not your daughter, I'm your son. And the parents are like, flabber. What? Like, where did this come from?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I wrote the book. I don't want only parents with transgender identifying children to read the book. Far from it. I want
Yes.
parents who are not yet facing this situation.
Yeah. And I think even people, I mean, I'm not a parent myself. I think people who are not even parents need to read it. People, it's something that everyone needs to be involved with, you know,
Yes.
no matter who you are. This is the future. And it's a future that is now 100%, by the way. Unfortunately, there are thousands of these,
Yes.
I mean, tens of thousands of these individuals across the globe who are going to be forever. I mean, I don't even know what the future is for some of these people, as you know, and the details of it are just horrific, particularly people who've had this extraordinary surgery that is it's Frankenstein stuff. And I mean, how can the medical establishment, you know, regain status with having these? And you actually just explain that, actually, because I think you did that very well in the book as well. How is, like, the American Pediatric Association, how are these large, highly, you know, in the past, highly august, highly respected institutions, how are they captured? Because it's very interesting, and I think it's actually, it's good for people to understand this, how it happens.
It's very important when you go to your pediatrician to understand that your pediatrician most likely just follows whatever her organization says. Doctors don't have the time to go and explore every issue. So you go to your professional organization, and whatever they advise you is what you do. Now, on this particular issue of gender dysphoria and treatment for gender dysphoria, the mainstream the professional organizations have been captured. And the way that happened is that small committees, groups of people, maybe just 5 or 10 people or even less, who have their own agenda, and they themselves are gender activists,
yes,
have brought these ideas into the organization and written the policy statements and other documents that they then present to the world as if there's a consensus of all the members of the organization, which is not at all the case. In fact, in these organizations, when members have attempted to debate and bring up, you know, opposing viewpoints, they have been silenced. They are not given the microphone at many of these groups. So this is what's going on in these groups. And parents, sadly, you cannot trust these organizations on this issue.
I don't think you'll be retiring anytime soon, by the way. I don't think this is going to have a very long tail. I mean, I'm hoping this is going to end in our lifetime. But I think one of the things that struck me, and I don't know, I'm sure you've thought this one through as well, is that the parents who've done this and have supported children to do this, it's very hard for them to admit to having done the worst thing that they could have ever done to a child. So, you know, I don't even know how did they ever come to terms with that? I've done the worst thing I could have done to my child.
Correct. Well, this is a point that was so well articulated by Helen Joyce. And she said that these are the parents that are going to die on the hill of, I did the right thing. And I'm in contact with such parents. Of course, it's beyond, you know, understandable that they signed on the dotted line to have their girl's breasts removed only because they thought she was going to commit suicide. Only because the professionals told them that your daughter's going to kill herself if she doesn't get this surgery.
Yeah.
So facing that means that they have to go back and acknowledge that they were duped. They were duped, and look at what happened to their kids.
Yeah, and just on that point, this suicide study. So there's some suicide study, is that correct? That constantly gets quoted, and it's actually very well discredited at this point. Is that correct?
Well, really, all the studies that show suicidality are discredited. And in fact, when we had the argument in front of the Supreme Court last December, the Skermetti case versus the state of Tennessee, the attorney that was representing the parents and organizations suing the Attorney General of Tennessee, they dropped the suicide argument.
Yeah.
It is no longer a valid argument.
It's very nightmarish. It's a very nightmarish world to live in, and you're really living in it more than most. And what keeps you going? How do you keep going?
I'm not going to say it doesn't get to me, because it does. I think what keeps me going is, number one, knowing that I'm doing the right thing. Number two, knowing that I'm having a great impact on people's lives. And people write to me and they tell me how they feel I've just saved their family, saved their child. And I think that's, when I speak, I get standing ovations. So
yeah, I'm not surprised.
Yeah, I mean, still, the emails that I get almost daily of devastated families, it takes a very big toll, and you have to try and have a thick skin, which I was not born with a thick skin. I was born with a thin skin.
Yeah. Well, maybe that thin skin though is exactly what's needed in this, because it's very, very tough work, and but we're not going to stop talking about it, because it's I don't know. It's worse, actually. It's almost worse. It is worse than eugenics. It's actually worse than eugenics, which is hard to believe. But the capture of the institutions, to me, is it's very scary. It's very scary how that can be so successful.
And there is a eugenics component, because we're creating a generation of sterile kids.
Yeah. Oh, God. Anyway, listen, Miriam, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate your time. And thank you, by the way, again, for your kind words about October 7th, which it's another subject we should talk about another day, or maybe I'll ask you one. Can I ask you one question about October 7th? What a psychological toll it has taken on Jews outside of Israel, living outside of Israel, many of them not religious, who have been dealing with a very new reality. And a kind of a changed world, that they were surprised to discover anti-Semitism was alive and well, and living next door.
Well, that is a discussion that we could have. I mean, I'm the child of Holocaust survivors, so that's an important discussion to have.
Okay, well, you know what? We're going to just leave that there, and we will have you back on again, Miriam, because I actually really would love to hear your thoughts on that, because it's obviously something that we're very deeply involved in at the moment, but and will be, I think, for quite some time. Miriam, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for everything that you're doing. God bless you.
The same, Anne. God bless you, and thank you for everything you're doing. And we'll talk again soon.
We will. God bless. And I really, just coming out of that interview, just one of the things that she had said there, because she had talked a lot about, she was saying basically, ideally you should have your children homeschooled, is one of the things she said. Yeah. But she also talked about the dangers of the internet and Instagram and X and, and TikTok and all of that. And I would say, funny, one of the things I meant to mention to her, but is I think a piece of advice I would give parents is the nicest, best thing you could possibly do for your children is to not allow them have a phone until they're 18. And I literally spoke, I think I mentioned this on the podcast in the past, but I spoke at an event recently to high school students in Santa Barbara. And a few of them came up afterwards and I said, and they were being very nice about what I had said and all that. And they were saying, I said, we could keep in touch. Why don't we all keep in touch? And, you can find me. I'm on X. I'm on all these places. And quite a few of these students, now obviously they're conservatives, but quite a few of the students that I met said, oh, I don't have a phone. Oh, I'm not on X. Oh, I don't have an Instagram account. And I said, okay, here's a message I want you to bring back to your parents. Can you go back to your parents and tell them that they have done such a beautiful, wonderful gift that they've given you, that you've avoided this crazy, mad landscape. And the idea of allowing children, unfeathered access to the Wild West of the internet, which is actually, Wild West is far too nice a way of describing it.
The Wild West was at least had a sheriff and a marshal.
That's actually a very good point. Actually, this is an unsheriffed area. I would just add that as another piece of advice. But Miriam is wonderful. And as I said at the end of the interview, I think we would like to have Miriam back on to talk particularly about October 7th and the Jewish issues, which she has a lot to say about as well. So we'll get back to that. But now, Phelim, we're going to move on to our new feature.
And that's the theme music for Burying the Lead.
Oh, Philip, you have a couple of examples this week of the Burying the Lead. Let's go for the New York Times first.
Of course. I mean, by the way, the New York Times could probably keep us going in Burying the Lead. So while we're doing this, and those of you who are watching on YouTube, watch the screen, because we're going to flip through that story and you're going to see what Philip's talking about. This is a story about the crash at Reagan National Airport.
Huge national interest in this.
On January 29, American Airlines flight 5342, which was carrying 64 people, many of them children, from going into Washington from Wichita, Kansas. A Black Hawk hit it, and everyone was killed, including everyone on the Black Hawk, who were all service members. I mean, if you can see there how big the story is. What I will tell you is a lot of these stories now, you can listen to them, it's an automated voice. If you listen to this, it takes 25 minutes. That's how long that story is, right?
So what we'll do is we'll flick through it, but you're going to give us some of the...
Oh, no, I'm going to give you now. I'm going to go straight to the lead, Anne. I'm not going to bury the lead.
Well, tell us where the lead is, Philip.
It's at the very last paragraph. It's the very last line.
So, when this happened, and I remember we were together, we were watching this in real time as when it happened. I mean, it was obviously a massive news story, huge public interest in what happened and why it happened.
Yes.
And so clearly, we're both journalists. Clearly, the piece of this story that everyone wants is what happened.
Yes.
So you're saying, Phelim, that it is answered in this story, is it?
Yeah, well, obviously they haven't made a full report, but obviously the New York Times got access to all the investigation as much as as far as it's gone, and they seem to be drawing some very definite conclusions. And do you remember there was something unusual about this accident, that they didn't release the identity of the pilot?
That's right.
And they were saying the family wanted privacy, and we're going, sorry, you're a service member in the Army or in the whatever it is, the Navy, I suppose, in a Black Hawk. Maybe it's the Air Force. If someone could write into the comments which branch of the military is. I'm not familiar with American military branches. And then, of course, it turned out to be a woman called Captain Lobach. And, the question always in these circumstances is, was DEI responsible?
Mm-hmm.
Was a woman allowed to pilot a helicopter to get the numbers up? Mm-hmm. Because Biden did say, and Obama did say, it's important to have gender balance in the military. And so we're going to say inadequate or underperforming people allowed to be promoted.
And we're not answering that question, but we are going to read what actually happened.
Yes. So
you decide.
So Captain Lobach was told that she needed to change direction to avoid the plane. The air traffic controller could see it. Now, they don't know, maybe she didn't hear it, but this is the last of this 25-minute story. These are the last few paragraphs. Direct, immediate intervention was needed that night. Instead of seeing and avoiding flight 5342, Captain Lobach continued flying straight at it. Investigators might never know why. There's no indication she was suffering from health issues at the time. 2 seconds after the controllers cut out instruction about passing behind the jet, Warrant Officer Eves replied, affirming for the second time that the Black Hawk saw the traffic.
Pat 25 has the aircraft in sight. Request visual separation, he said.
And this is Warrant Officer Eves, who's also in the Black Hawk helicopter. Visual separation approved, the controller replied. It was their last communication. The Black Hawk was 15 seconds away from crossing paths with the jet. Warrant Officer Eves then turned his attention, Warrant Officer Eves, who is a man, then turns his attention to Captain Lobach. He told her he believed that air traffic control wanted them to turn left towards the East River bank. Turning left would have opened up more space between the helicopter and flight 5342, which was then heading for runway 33 at an altitude of 300 feet. And the last line of the story, she did not turn left. So she didn't do what the air traffic controller told her. She didn't do what her colleague told her. We don't know why.
And they've put this at the very, very end of the story.
She did not turn left.
Of a story that was 25, it would take you 25 minutes to read it.
Yeah.
And the last line is, she did not turn left.
That should be the first line.
Oh, 100%. The whole story should be completely inverted.
Yeah.
So this is why we created this new feature on the podcast, and we're going to be doing this, and it happens all the time, and we're constantly remarking on it, because when you're reading a story like that, any ordinary person reading that story, what they're looking for is this line at the very, very end, and it should be at the top of the story.
So she's warned by air traffic control and warned by her colleagues.
And she didn't do what she was told. She didn't do it. She didn't follow instructions.
Yes.
But this isn't the only example of this.
I was just reading the Irish Times. Actually, it was over the weekend. And, Ireland has a lot of problems with gangs. Mm-hmm. Like many places, MS-13 and Trend de Agra, although I know MS-13 is only made up of Maryland dads just trying to look after his wife and 3 kids. But Ireland has the Kinahan gang. It had the Gilligan gang, the Westies, real gangsters. But this is in the Irish Times. Gardaí have identified 1,600 people.
1,600 people?
That's Gardaí, which is the Irish police, linked to an international gang specialising in fraud and money laundering in the Republic of Ireland, including 100 members responsible for its direction. It's the biggest gang ever in Ireland.
That's a huge story. I haven't read this, so this is all new to me now.
Oh yes, I just put this in the last minute, right? It's called the Black Axe Gang, right? Which, who knows why, there was the Westies and there was the Flash Harry Gang and all, and then there's the family. All these Irish gangs have names like many gangs, Trend de Agra and all that. So all gangs have funny names. So though the amount of money confirmed stolen and laundered by the Black Axe Gang in Ireland has now reached 100 million, Gardaí believe...
100 million euros, by the way. Gardaí believe the true figure is much higher.
This is a very interesting paragraph. Some members of the Gardaí believe the scale of the Black Axe Gang's activities mean it is generating profits in Ireland that rival the domestic drugs trade, even...
surpassing it.
Yes.
So it's huge.
It's massive.
It's massive.
1,600 people, right? So they started investigating it in 2020. 1,600 people connected. 610 suspect arrested. More than 350 people have been prosecuted, with 40 juvenile offenders, 100 senior management rank members of the gang. I mean, all this thing.
I can already feel, because I don't know the end of this story, but I already feel that there's something that is not being mentioned here that may well get mentioned, maybe somewhere in the story.
Towards the end, almost like the last 4 paragraph, we finally hear Black Axe was started in Nigeria.
No way, Philip. Nigeria.
In 1977.
Lovely.
Initially as a university-based fraternity or cult whose logo at the time was a slave's arm in shackles being broken by a black axe. However, it has morphed into an organised crime group. So Ireland has enough Nigerians to have 1,600 members of a gang.
And the Irish Times choose to put this at the end of the story.
At the end of the story.
The identity of these gang members.
Well, the source.
And so you're reading the story.
Of them.
So you're reading the story, and the presumption is these are all Irish-born people in a hoodlum in a gang, only to find out that these were imports.
And by the way,
an imported criminal gang.
Yes, but also in a country where immigration is now one of the biggest political issues of the day.
Yes.
That it's not like some countries don't have an immigration issue. So, I don't imagine Brazil has an immigration issue, or, there's many countries that don't have Russia doesn't have an immigration issue. But Ireland, it's actually, there are riots in the street. I saw a poll at the weekend. Housing and immigration are the 2 biggest political concerns. They make up over 50% of people's number 1 political concern. By the way, climate change in Gaza,
it doesn't
8%.
Yeah, hardly
8%.
Hardly appears at all.
We get news that this is a Nigerian gang, the biggest gang in Ireland, the most lucrative gang in Ireland, the gang that is making the most money and causing the biggest destruction is from Nigeria. So that's burying the lead, and we will bring you more of this. By the way, send us in the comments.
If you have an example of a very good buried lead in a story, please do send it to us in the comments. We'd love to, and we'll attribute it, and we'll tell that we got it from you. Don't worry about that. So we are very grateful, by the way, to everyone who has watched the play. As I said, over 70,000 people have watched so far, and
we've almost got up to 200 comments now on the play. I mean,
and we read all of the comments, by the way. So
on YouTube, you go to transontrial.com. So
and here's one of them. We'll give you a taste of a few of the comments.
From them?
So it's from Graham Spence 6003.
Yes.
He said, accidental genius in the unintentional comedy of a court transcript. The cast deliver a rehearsed reading that warms as they become accustomed to audience participation and they lean into their parts. John Nicholson's everyone loves him.
Who's an MP?
John Nicholson's verbose pomposity is an absolute delight from which his career, if he still had one, would never recover.
Yeah, so in Britain there's an organisation called Charity Commission where it's like the IRS where you get accredited to be a charity. And when LGB Alliance, which stands up for women's rights, for gay rights, actually against the trans madness, they became a charity. And Mermaids, which is a youth-affirming, gender-affirming youth organisation, in other words, mutilating children, they support mutilating of children, medicalisation and mutilation of children. They challenged in a charity commission hearing. I've been searching. I think this is the first time in modern history that a charity has challenged another charity to right to exist.
Absolutely, it's the first time it's ever happened.
And very interesting, the trial was flipped. And it became actually an examination of Mermaids' ideology, of the ideology of trans youth affirmation. And there was nothing there. Their ideology is skin deep, actually. It is based on cliches. It's based on misogyny. It's based on gender stereotyping. You know, if you're a tomboy, then you must be a boy, and you're medicalized. So let's hear more what more people thought about us.
So
about the play.
Anna Scantlebury 444 wrote as well, fantastic, what a terrific record for the future. When we all look back and wonder how the lunatics took control, it's painfully funny and yet almost too painful to watch. Marvellous acting of the truest true crime you'll ever see. Well done, all concerned.
And then someone else, LGB without the TQ, said, I followed this hearing. It was so incredible. Kate made me cry. Now, Kate is Kate Harris, who we had on last week. And she said, stop transing away the gay, right? Which is actually a very good point. So some Muslim communities, some Indian communities, if their children are gay, they will prefer that there's a medical solution to a girl being boyish or butch. They'll say, they'll take the solution that the child is actually born in the wrong body, rather than accepting that they may be gay. So it's conversion therapy. It's conversion surgery.
Yeah, transing away the gay. Even though I watched, here's somebody else, Andrea Jones 7023. Even though I watched most of it live, this encapsulates the total and utter capture of the institutions to the detriment of lesbians. And yes, I probably blubbed when Kate broke down. So she's talking about Kate Harris at the end. Yes. And it's funny, I've had a phone call from one of our supporters who talked exactly about that at the very end of the play. Kate Harris talks about how easily she would have been a victim of the trans contagion if it had taken hold at that point in her life.
Yeah, so Joseph 7E324 said, didn't expect to find humour in such a serious topic, but it worked. And then Thurston Howell the 12th 3220, what a name, said, ready-made drama, just add actors, fascinating and moving, thank you. So please, you are missing out on a treat.
Yes.
Go to transontrial.com, leave comments,
please do,
share it with everyone you like, share it with everyone you dislike, and let us know what you think.
So that's it from us for this week. And please, as Film says, keep watching, keep sharing, and let us know what you thought, because we read all the comments, and we really enjoy doing that. So talking of which, and obviously we're getting a lot of very nice responses to the play and to the work that we do. We need your help to keep on doing that. So if you could give what you can, please, you need to go to unreportedstoriesociety.com, unreportedstoriesociety.com, and donate what you can. We'll have a link up in the show notes of where you can donate.
We are a 501c3.
You do get a tax write-off, and we do appreciate all your contributions. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.